back. You're watching Credlin. Well, Australia is set to become a nation of litigants, according to a report out today by the Menzies Research Centre. Pushed by an increase in the litigation investment industry looking to maximise profits, the number of class actions in Australia has more than doubled following a lack of regulation. The report has found the return on investment last year for Australia's three largest litigation funders was between 139% and 165%. That's 17 times more than that for investors in the ASX 200 stocks and more than 10 times the average global hedge fund. Joining me now is the Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater from Sydney. Nick, take us through the findings of this report, because if anyone is against, like I am, the Americanisation of our legal system, this is a real worry.
Yeah, what we found, you've already sketched out the massive expansion in the number of cases that are funded by outside funders, many from overseas. Much of this is overseas funding coming in essence, betting on our legal cases. So they put money behind the case, and if they win, they take a big share of the winnings. 30% is not uncommon. So in a case last week, for instance, where costs were decided in a class action around the use of toxic foam that had apparently leaked out around defence bases in Australia, the litigants got about $100,000 each. The funder walked away with $77 million, of which almost $48 million was profit. So that's the sort of money they're sucking out of these payments that are made. And right now, in a funded case, whatever the court awards in costs and damages is split about 60-40, 60% to the funders and the lawyers and 40% to the people who actually suffered the damage. So it's grossly unjust. And at the core of it is the fact that people can invest in these funds in a completely unregulated way, which means there's no limit to the amount of profits that they can expect out of them.
And I understand the way that litigation funders work in Australia is different than other markets. We're incredibly unregulated in this space, and they go hunting for class actions, basically kicking off class actions, not necessarily on legal merit, but often just as a way to make their millions.
Well, this whole jamboree was started really under the last Labor government, when Chris Bowen, as Treasurer, inexplicably, to my mind, made the decision that out of all the course of investments you could make, investing in the success of legal cases would be unregulated. So it's not regulated. And we can talk about Labor's connections with Maurice Blackburn, the big legal firm they're one of their big donors that actually benefits from this, actually big in this space. But leaving that to one side, what that created was a market. So people put their money in, knowing they were going to get these big returns. More money flows in. And as more money flows in, they've got to go looking for more court cases to back. And so that is what's driving this massive expansion in court cases in Australia, which is not good for anybody.
I know when anyone criticises this method of funding or asks questions, there's a bit of pushback almost immediately, saying, well, this is the only way the little guy can take on big companies. But given that example you used at the top of the show, that the plaintiff who won the case gets $100,000, did you say, and what, 50 million goes the way of these generally US funders, that shows that the system is not working in the favour of the little guy.
It's not. And to take the case of somebody who perhaps, sadly loses their house in a bushfire or a flood, and they join one of these class actions, and the courts award damages so that they can rebuild their house, so they can go back to where they were. But of course, they're only going to be able to build half the house, because half of it is going to these litigation funders. It's got to be brought into line. But there are a lot of people who want to keep this going, particularly there's a handful of law firms in Australia which are really into this business and are driving this with tremendous vigour. But the key to it is to get these funders under some kind of regulatory framework, much as any other kind of investment is. And the government's already moving towards this. But much more has got to be done, as we outline in the report.
Well, just talk to me on that, because the state Labor government in Victoria, and let's be very clear about their links to some of these Labor law firms, they are going to make it easier, not harder, and that's up to the federal government in order to step in. What can the federal government do?
Well, let's not, I don't spend all night on this show beating up on the Andrews government, much as they might deserve it. But there's a freedom of information request about information, correspondence between them and Maurice Blackburn over this attempt to bring a bill through Parliament to allow contingency fees, which will allow law firms basically not to be paid for what they do, but to take a slice, 50, 30, whatever it is, % of the winnings. So they're right up to their necks in it. But the federal government is looking to do a lot. First of all, it can regulate these litigation funders. That will pull it in. Secondly, they could say that in a case where federal law is involved, for instance, corporations law, that has to be heard in the federal courts, and there will be this class action expansion won't be allowed. And thirdly, they can put pressure on law firms by saying, well, if you want to act in this way, effectively as an investment vehicle, not just a law firm, then you'll have to be registered and licensed as an investment vehicle. And that, of course, will throw their books open, and I'm not sure they'll be too keen at that. The government has lots of hands to play for this, but importantly, I think it's got the moral high ground on its side, because nobody thinks that a 60-40 split is fair.
All right, well, let's see some action. Nick Cater, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Peter.
Let's